What up, though? I call them the small and large squares and or rectangles. What is projected from the inside of the borders of these small and large squares and or rectangles is illusion. What is outside of the borders of these small and large squares and or rectangles is reality. Behold, we may power off. U.S. Department of Justice, Criminal Division. Trial results in multiple count conviction of leader of a pseudo-religious sect. Following a 3-week jury trial, on January 23, 2004, defendant Dwight York was convicted on 10 counts, including RICO conspiracy, 3 counts of transporting minors in interstate commerce for the purpose of criminal violations, 1 count of travel in interstate commerce with the intent to engage in criminal violations with minors, and 3 counts of structuring cash transactions. York, also known as Isa, the leader of the United Nation of Nubian Moors, was found guilty of committing a pattern of racketeering activity along with several indicted co-conspirators, in which the enterprise transported minors in interstate commerce from New York to Georgia and from Georgia to Florida for the purpose of engaging in criminal violations, and structured cash transactions, all for the purpose of providing York with power, violations with children and money. York violated and abused countless minor-aged children within his organization, 14 of whom testified for the prosecution. At trial, York moved, or caused to be moved, children from Sullivan County, New York to Putnam County, Georgia, and from Georgia to Orange County, Florida, for the purpose of continuing the violations of children. Cafe Haven, child molestation world record holder. Being the CNN loyalist and avid conspiracy theorist that I am, the infamous 2002 case of H.E. Reverend Dr. Malachi Z. York, L. Accusation per accusation, this case seemed to me very bizarre and far-fetched. Reverend Dr. York was accused of molesting up to 13 children up to 10 times a day for up to 10 years. My first thought was, that is a lot of boning. And immediately my suspicions started. If we take one child for, let's say, 5 times a day for 5 days a week, if I am correct, that is 25 times of having 25 times of juicing in 1 week. Now, multiply that 25 times by 13 children, and that is 325 times he would have to had juiced for that week, correct? Now we take 325 times a week by 52 weeks again. If I am correct, that comes to 16,900 times he was juicing in a year. Let's finish it up. Take that 16,900 times 10 years. If I am correct again, that comes to 169,000 times. downtown Atlanta, men who were Nuwapian. The issues I had with what was being said in the media about the case were confirmed with my conversations with them. Because of the doctrine that Reverend York has presented to the world, there are people who wanted him off the streets as a free man at all cost. Malachi York is also a sovereign who knows what his status and the UCC codes entail. In one of his books called Let's Set the Record Straight, he outlined the history between America and Morocco and the treaties that were made between them, namely the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, which is the oldest treaty that is still recognized to this day. Dr. York was told the women who were with him at the time of his arrest would be let go if he would plead guilty, being that they were innocent and it was he who the prosecution really wanted in the first place. How the hell could somebody possibly juice that many times, yet alone have enough time? Malachi Z. York has written over 400 books. That's right, over 400 books. Now, find any person who publishes books and ask them how long the process of writing and publishing just one book is, and see what they say. It was all started by a group of kids who lived on a Nuwapian land and could not break rules as they wanted. It was against the rules to juice if they weren't married. They couldn't dress in skin-tight clothing and go out to party. They got fed up with the rules that were in place to keep the order that was established by Dr. York, and that was their way of getting back at him. They then conspired with the racist sheriff by the name of Howard Richard Seals of Putnam County, Georgia, who hated the Nuwapians and could not come to grips with the reality that a group of black people lived together, had wealth, and no criminal records. In return for a conviction, the government promised them they could sue Dr. York for millions of dollars and split the pot between them. It was also the result of the 476 acres of land that the Nuwapians owned stood in the way of an economic plan that the Putnam County government had in development for the next 20 years. This economic plan included turning the city of Eatonton, Putnam County, Georgia, into a tourist attraction, resort area of sorts. This also had ties with neighboring Greene County that has a major resort area called Reynolds Plantation and a Ritz-Carlton hotel. Reynolds Plantation is owned by Mercer Reynolds, who is close friends and business partners of former President Bush, the younger. Recently, Reynolds has been in the headlines for having to sell some of his assets to satisfy lenders. Dr. Frederick Bright, MD, OB-GYN, who is licensed to practice in the state of Georgia, was called in as a medical expert by the family of Dr. York to review the information and evidence that was brought in by the government prosecution as early as December 2002. After his examination of the evidence and testimonies of the alleged victims, he found many what he termed consistent inconsistencies. In child abuse cases, it is the normal procedure to have medical examinations done within 72 hours of the alleged abuse, the acute stage of the alleged events, to obtain forensic evidence, skin, hair, semen, saliva, etc., from the genital areas. What Dr. Bright found was that no history of events was taken by the examiners to determine the level of evaluation necessary for each victim, which is very critical. Some of the children had STDs, including chlamydia and herpes. Dr. York, upon examination, was found to have had none of these diseases and did not even have the antibodies present to suggest that he was even treated for any of these diseases and had them cured. For the record, all of the alleged victims didn't have an STD. This shows an inconsistency. They all should have had the same STD because they testified that Dr. York would go from one to another. There was no DNA evidence ever found to suggest that Reverend York had engaged in any violation with any of these alleged victims. There were no pregnancies, there were no testimonies of condoms being used, and these girls were at the age of puberty. None of the children gave any exact dates. This includes nothing about, I remember because it was 2 days before my birthday. They always gave very vague time frames, like it was the summer of 98 or it was the fall of 99, which doesn't give a defendant any way to prove he was not in said place at said time. There were no recorded interviews or statements, written, audio, or visual, from the alleged victims that could be evaluated by the defense experts, which means the government prosecution could make any statements necessary to bring charges against the accused. This is very important because the absence of recorded interviews prevents scrutiny of the prosecution's statement by the defense. Five other children were taken from the Nuwaubian land that was called Tamaray, Egypt of the West, without consent and knowledge of their parents and given examinations by state agencies, and not one of them were found to be abused, mentally or physically. 8 of the 13 who originally alleged abuse by Dr. York recanted their own testimonies on sworn affidavits. To add to that, many of their own immediate family testified against them and said they were lying. The government star witness, Abigail Washington, recanted her testimony of abuse as well as a sworn affidavit, and even recanted her testimony that Reverend Dr. York was guilty of the money structuring charges. FBI lead investigator Julaine Ward testified under oath in court that she had no evidence or eyewitnesses to prove or suggest that Reverend York transported or caused to be transported any children for the purpose of illicit acts. Note to the reader, this was the sole reason for the entire trial. Assistant DA Richard Moultrie stated for the record that he had no videotapes to prove any of the allegations. This is important because supposedly videotapes were said to have been made of Dr. York engaging in these alleged acts. Dr. York, over the past 40 years, has written more than 400 books on religious, scientific, and historical topics. Anyone who has written a dissertation, thesis paper, research paper, documentary, etc., knows how much energy and time goes into writing such as these. How does someone have enough time to write 400 books, yet alone do it while juicing 13 kids every day, all day for over 10 years? This is from Digital Journal. They never considered talking to us, the unheard voices of people involved with controversial leader Dr. York, by Baden Bauer, May 2022. On April 22nd, 2004, Dr. York, known to the world as Dr. Malachi Z. York, was sentenced to 135 years in prison based on the Federal Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, for allegedly racketeering the Mann Act, for allegedly transporting minors in interstate commerce for purposes of engaging in unlawful violations. and cash structuring to avoid cash transaction reporting. At 77 years old, he currently resides at the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, USP Florence AD Max, a supermax federal prison located in Florence, Colorado. During its pursuit to bring down Dr. York, the federal government also displaced thousands of people and took their land and homes. Dr. York was the leader of the Nuwaubian Nation, or the United Nuwaubians, an organization of people who believed in his teachings and lived their lives as a tribe. Over 1,000 books published. Dr. York's literature influenced. During the 90s, the Nuwaubians built a community in Eatonton, Georgia, which prompted members from across the country to relocate. Known as Tamaray Village, the community consisted of 19 developed acres sitting on 476 acres of land. It was renowned for having Egyptian structures built by the people who lived there. We had our own movie theaters. We had our own schools. We had structure and educators, said Zayad LaRoche, a man who lived at Tamaray between the ages of 12 and 24. We do field trips. We went out and explored. We celebrated holidays. What makes it so great is that when you're a part of a larger family structure, it's exhilarating. Those were my golden years as I see it. And I'm not talking about just regular schooling. We learned different languages. It's something that was very big. We had the privileges of a child who lived in a rich household. There were people who came from different countries who taught at our schools. That's how detailed things were. Tamaray consisted of a lot of people like him, many of whom are intelligent and productive members of society who credit a lot of their education and skills to their time at Tamaray. Education was one of the reasons why Dana Miller decided to volunteer at Tamaray. Now 45 years old, the Cornell University graduate was 27 years old at the time in 2021. While also being involved with Tamaray's education program. I loved the spiritual community that was there in Tamaray, Miller said. I was also helping because I was a school teacher with the educational program on the land. The children who were there, either as guests or residents of the land, attended school there. And that was one of the reasons I came. Miller is currently a fifth grade school teacher who credits her start at Tamaray and her time with Dr. York for her success. I started out with the school aspect. I was a researcher for Dr. York's publication. When Dr. York wrote materials, he would also put the source information in so that people could verify everything that he wrote. I was one of the people who worked on the research, Miller said. Miller not only volunteered at Tamaray, but she was also present the day the federal government first invaded the land, which was also the day Dr. York was taken into custody. Miller defined the day as a scene from a movie. Law enforcement officers drove up to the property, invaded the buildings with guns, interrogated residents, and trashed their homes. When we went back into some of the guest houses where people stay, everything was just dumped out on the floor, Miller said. Beds were overturned. People's clothes were just covered with stuff. Things are planted in people's homes. People's pictures were taken out. Some of the law enforcement officials ate a birthday cake for a daughter who was giving it to her father. They ate food that was in the oven for people who were guests. They took the bath towels and wiped their brows on them. It was just disrespectful. It was traumatizing. After the raid, I developed panic attacks that I did not have before the raid. The people of Tamaray learned of Dr. York's arrest while being detained by law enforcement officials. At the time, they thought it was a misunderstanding. Dr. York faced state and federal accusations, a highly publicized trial, recanted witness statements, inaccurate media coverage, and incompetent attorney guidance. It seemed as though Dr. York was only guilty of being the leader of a growing organization of high standards and morality and decided to lay its roots in a rural part of Georgia that was dominated by pink and gray people. According to Bernard Foster, a general contractor in Atlanta and tribe member, Dr. York never dealt with the day-to-day operations of the organization. Also, he didn't live in Tamaray, but had his own residence in Athens, Georgia, which was almost an hour away. In August 2004, 2 years after the raid took place, the federal government forced the people of Tamaray off the property and seized it. That was a very heartbreaking moment, LaRoche said. We were literally forced to just leave in 7 days. That was a terrible time for me and many other people. Imagine you being moved out of your homeland and being expelled to something that's less. Eventually, all the structures on the property were destroyed by a vindictive sheriff, and the government sold off the property. They grazed the whole land over. They snatched it with a bogus federal court case. This is one of the reasons why they charged Dr. York with the RICO Act, so that they could employ the law that was actually designed for mafias that says any interest that the individual being charged may have can be seized by the federal government, Foster said. He continued, they tried to say that all of the land and anything that was on it was in the interest of Dr. York, even though he didn't own the land. He wasn't on the title, and 2 years prior, they forced him to remove his name from any title. The land was in the title of the church and the 9 landowners. Children's testimony and affidavits show that Dr. York's son, Jacob York, made the violation charges. Habia Washington says Jacob York used child abuse to get his father arrested before the feds got involved. Jacob told me that I should go to the FBI with the story because there were rumors going around that some people were speaking to the FBI, that the FBI had my name, and that they knew that I was in charge of the land for some period of time. He said that there were rumors that they had been violated, and the kids mentioned my name and said I knew about what was going on. He told me to go to the administration and that I should not wait for the administration to come to me and ask about it, Washington said. Washington discussed how she went through with the plan to talk to the administration and lie about her encounters with Dr. York. The federal government also attempted to have 13 children testify against Dr. York. From the 13 so-called victims, 9 of them testified on behalf of the defense in the federal case, Foster said. Out of the other 5, 2 of the testimonies were thrown out because they were found to be perjurious. And the last ones weren't thrown out. But if you were in the courthouse, you would have heard how suspicious they were. They tried to say that Dr. York purposely did not put $10,000 in the bank so that he could avoid stating where he got it from. Dr. York never made any deposits with our organization. He wasn't in the finance department. Even the sister in the finance department, who was responsible for making deposits as well as responsible for circulating the money and making it move, testified to that, Foster said. Some of the alleged victims, such as Issa Michael Johnson, also submitted affidavits where they not only stated that they weren't violated, but also detailed how authorities tried to coerce them to falsely testify against Dr. York. FBI agents then reminded me that my mother, Kathy Johnson, was incarcerated, and if I cooperated and made certain statements and accusations, he could get my mother out of prison and not mention her name in the trial. Wanted me to exchange false statements for this favor, Johnson said. Dr. York remains in prison with no hope of parole and little contact with the outside world. Due to his status as a Liberian diplomat, the Liberian government has made many requests for his release over the years. People around the world have advocated for his innocence. The Nuwaubians have suffered the most. They lost their land, their home, their security, and the fruits of their labor. Without consideration, their lives were turned upside down, and they'll never get back what the United States took from them. They don't care. They don't care when it gets down to it. You don't believe me? Ask any of the survivors of Rosewood. Ask any of the survivors of Black Wall Street. If they can't beat you at your own game legally, they'll just arrest your leaders. They'll slam them in the media. And most people go for it. And here we have the destruction of another positive Black community, Foster said. This is from SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center. United Nuwaubian Nation of Moors meets its match in Georgia. September 2002 by Bob Moser. Eatonton, Georgia. Who were these black cowboys? Folks in Putnam County, the sparsely populated dairy capital of Georgia, could not help wondering. Nobody had batted an eye in 1993 when a man from Brooklyn named York paid nearly $1 million for 476 acres out on Shadydale Road. But when a bunch of stern-looking American Yankees in 10-gallon hats and lizard skin boots began to pop up around Eatonton, Putnam's picturesque little county seat, people paid attention. You'd see the men wearing boots and hats and all this, but hardly ever any women or children, says Georgia Smith, a longtime leader in Eatonton's Black community. Everybody say, those the Yorks, we thought it was a family. Thought. By 1996, 3 years later, hundreds more Yorks were moving down from big cities like Baltimore, Philadelphia, Hartford, New York, and Washington, D.C. The next thing anybody knew, the cowboys had morphed into Indians, the Yamasee Native American Moors of the Creek Nation, and taken to calling York Chief Black Eagle while applying for a license to open a casino. The application was rejected. The Indians mutated into the United Nuwaubian Nation of Moors. Were they Moors first, then Indians? It could get mighty confusing. Most Putnamites saw the Nuwaubians, as they now were universally known, as a curiosity rather than a threat. This is the South, says Dorothy Adams, a white woman who was formerly Putnam's County attorney. We're used to kooks. Cowboys with snakeskin boots, with lizard skin boots, with alligator skin boots. We're kooks. Heck, we're proud of our kooks. Every family has them. So we took a live and let live attitude. Before long, Putnam County's 19,000 souls would be up to their ears in Nuwaubians' peculiar brand of race baiting. And by the time nearly 300 law enforcement officers stormed the compound on Shadydale Road this May and hauled the savior off to jail on child violation charges, local folks' tolerance, curiosity had long since hardened. into anger at the man who tried to start a race war in Georgia. He had to do something to keep people in the fold. Says one of his children, a man who spoke to the intelligence report but asked to be identified only by his first name, Jacob. A videotape made years later captures the dream York tried to sell his urban disciples. I'm talking about a real nation, our own nation, York proclaims in his high-pitched, antic voice. With our own passports, with our own tax system, where no one tells us what to do but us. In early 1990s, as York was beginning to speak to his followers about Georgia, the administration about Georgia, in the early 1990s, as York was beginning to speak to his followers about Georgia, in a 29-page report, the agency laid out a series of shocking allegations. Witnesses described a special AAC security team called the Mujahid, or Sword of Islam. Witnesses alleged that the Mujahid was involved in a spectrum of criminal activity, including narcotics and protection rackets. Also described the AAC's so-called construction crew, a group that allegedly burned down buildings York wanted to buy at a cut-rate price. At cut-rate prices. They detailed purchases of a number of AK-47 automatic weapons by members. They explored the way that the AAC allegedly muscled its way into security contracts with businesses. None of these allegations have been proven in court. As his son Jacob put it, he's in the dictionary under audacity. Either him or Barack. On a warm spring day in 1997, J.D. Dizzy Adams, Putnam County's building inspector, drove his truck out to Shadydale Road to inspect the pyramids and housing units cropping up on Dwight York's land, on Malachi Z. York's land, on Imam Isa land. But when he got to the gate, armed Nuwaubian guards denied him entry. Okay. Get up out of here. You ain't got no business here. They won't let me in, he reported to Putnam's brand new sheriff, Howard Seals. That was the first real sign of trouble, says Seals. They're not conforming. A stocky, chain-smoking lawman with a bushy blonde mustache. Seals was elected sheriff 3 years after the Cowboys landed in Putnam. The Cowboys. Alligator skin boots. He returned with Dizzy Adams to Shadydale Road the next day. When they were finally admitted onto the property, Adams found a building under construction that had not been issued a permit. No big deal, really. A representative of York's came to town and got a permit for a big metal storage building. That was that. Until the following March, when an Atlanta TV station ran a feature about the Ramsey Social Club, a night spot on the Nuwaubian Holy Land. What nightclub, the sheriff wondered. When he and Adams drove back out to Shadydale Road, they found that the storage building had indeed become a nightclub with Egyptian trappings, part of an Egyptian theme park York was now planning. Former county attorney Dorothy Adams filed suit to prevent further construction on the land. The Nuwaubians countersued. The battle was on, and Putnam County's honest sheriff was about to become the white devil incarnate. Putnam County officials started to put up roadblocks to York's plans for a sovereign nation. He wanted to take over the county. Says Sandra Adams, one of the 2 African Americans on the county commission. one of the two African Americans, one of the two blacks, one of the two black bliggity blacks on the county commission. When you want to take over, you divide and conquer. So they played the race card. And even though Putnam County is certainly not known for racism, everybody stands up and listens when the race card is played. You know? Adams should know. When the Nuwaubians first started complaining of discrimination, the fiery commissioner went straight to Sheriff Seals. I said, make sure you're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. She began to express her increasingly negative view of the group. The Nuwaubians' flyers posted on the websites and handed out in Eatonton, Milledgeville, Athens, and Macon. The flyer accused a race-hating Sheriff Seals of planning to launch an attack on innocent men, women, and children of the Nuwaubian nation. This picture is Malachi Z. York, or who I know him as is Imam Isa. In April 1999, Seals tried to deliver a court order mandating that the Ramsey Social Club be locked up. Wearing 9mm pistols on their hips, two Nuwaubian guards planted themselves in front of the sheriff's car and refused to let him pass. I pulled back, Seals said. Normally, I'd never do that, but they clearly were desperate for an armed confrontation, and I was not going to give it to them if I could help it. An armed confrontation or doing their damn job. You be the judge, you decide. The size of the Nuwaubians' arsenal was uncertain. The size of the Nuwaubians' arsenal was uncertain. The Nuwaubians' arsenal was uncertain. It's uncertain about the size of the arsenal, so it's also uncertain of whether or not they had an arsenal. But the group put on a show of increasing militants. Dressed in black fatigues, the men conducted paramilitary drills in full view of Shadydale Road. Full view, and not trying to hide. York railed. They are the devil. Were the devil, always will be the devil, he said. And when they come for me, and they will come for me, you must be prepared. In the summer swelter of 1999, York was ordered to appear on contempt charges. The court date, June 29, fell smack in the middle of the Nuwaubians' annual Savior's Day festival, a celebration of York's birthday that attracted thousands of Nuwaubians from the U.S. and abroad. Worried, Sheriff Seals tried to convince the judge to postpone York's court date. The judge refused. In mid-June, Everett Leon Stout came to town, a longtime associate of white supremacist groups like the Montana Freemen. Look up the Montana Freemen, y'all. See what that's about. Which had an 81-day standoff with federal officers in 1996. Stout had been calling himself a common law judge for years, filing suits and issuing bogus warrants for government official arrest. Y'all can do y'all own digging and research and find out about Stout, who called himself a common law judge. You can look at the filings, the lawsuits that he filed, the warrants for the officials. You can look into all of that stuff. Don't just let it stop with this show. Continue, find out things. Make your own judgments about things once you have all the information compiled. Now, saying he was working on behalf of the Nuwaubians, Stout filed a complaint. Wait a minute. Working on behalf of the Nuwaubians. Everett Leon Stout came to town, a longtime associate of white supremacist groups. Stout filed a complaint in federal court, signed by more than 200 people, listing their address as 404 Shadydale Road, the Nuwaubian compound. Everett Leon Stout came to town, a longtime associate of white supremacists, now saying he was working on behalf of the Nuwaubians. It's not a question of what a king would do. It's a question of what a free man would do. He issued arrest warrants for several Superior Court judges, 2 deputies, a county commissioner, attorney Frank Ford, and Sheriff Seals. He also filed million-dollar lawsuits against several officials, including Sandra Adams, the black commissioner, the black bliggity black commissioner. A record crowd of 5,000 Nuwaubians streaming into Putnam County for the week-long celebration of Savior's Day. The day York finally went to court, as many as 700 black-clad Nuwaubians massed around the courthouse square in Eatonton. Inside the courthouse, news cameras competed for space with Nuwaubians and townspeople who wanted to watch the mysterious York testify. As the days wore on, the judge ordered the courtroom cleared of spectators. Attorneys on both sides emerged with sighs of relief, announcing that an agreement had been reached that would end the zoning conflicts. The lawsuits and accusations would continue to fly for 3 more years. The anonymous letters had started to land on Sheriff Seals' desk in 1998. They continued pretty ambiguous charges of child violation and statutory violation, he said. Then a folded up piece of poster paper arrived with a detailed diagram of the compound on Shadydale Road, identifying where children and concubines were housed. Children and concubines were housed. Children of who? Concubines of who? Now that it seemed the sender had reliable information about the Nuwaubian, Seal and the administration, the agency, began to investigate the charges. Early in 2001, a breakthrough letter arrived naming some of York's alleged victims in a pattern of abuse dating back to his days in Brooklyn. People around Putnam County have been suspecting violation shenanigans for some times. They'd heard tell of Nuwaubians in labor being driven to Baldwin County's hospital to deliver, accompanied by armed male guards who made sure they didn't identify the father. Besides, says Georgia Smith, you'd see these young teenage girls walking around 9 months pregnant, pushing strollers with 2 babies in them. Everywhere you look, they was all pregnant. And I'm saying, what's going on here? Are they going to wipe us out with population? Oh my God. Georgia Smith said, what's going on here? Are they going to wipe us out with population? Why Georgia Smith probably got a daughter walking around with a baby in a carriage in a stroller, or a nephew with a newborn child, or auntie or cousin. They're going to wipe us out with population because they having babies. Was she against having babies? Or a fetus? Or a viable being? By 2001, a mass exodus from York's cult was in full swing, aided this time by York's son Jacob, who was helping departing women and children find shelter in Atlanta and encouraging them to come forward with their stories of abuse. Jacob says he had begun to question his father's teaching early in life when his mother sent him away to private school. In April 2001, a far more famous man and an Egyptian fez gave York a last hurrah. The Reverend Jesse Jackson scheduled a stop on Shadydale Road as part of a tour through the South. Leading up to this much-touted event, the paramilitary drills recommenced. Apparently fired up by their training, 2 Nuwaubian men beat up a former reporter in the parking lot of an Eatonton grocery store. Another reporter who had covered the Nuwaubians was harassed while checking out at the same grocery store that day. Donning a Nuwaubian fez, Jackson gave a speech in the Nuwaubian concert shell where York had preached about white devils. Jackson said, This is the American dream. This is the American dream, Jackson declared. The agency's investigation was slowed by the events of September 11th. Determined to avoid another Waco, Chef Seals and the agency devised an extremely careful plan to raid the compound where York had returned from his Athens mansion to live in 2001. They decided to wait until York had left the property so he could not order the faithful to open fire. On May 7th, nearly 300 federal and state law enforcement officers came to Putnam County waiting for their cue. The call came the next afternoon. York and Kathy Johnson were taken into custody. Officers moved rapidly onto the compound, securing its perimeters in 3 minutes with no resistance from the 80 to 100 surprised Nuwaubians inside. Seals was relieved that a shootout had once again been averted. But if you remember, they said they had no idea about their arsenal or even if it was an arsenal. But Seals was happy that a shootout had once again been averted. Around 10 p.m., as officers continued to scour the compound for weapons and child violations or child violation recordings, a radio message came. They're coming in force to take it back. As the law enforcement convoy moved out, it passed some 200 Nuwaubians gathered on the other side of the roadblock Seals men had erected. We pulled out to avoid a confrontation, he said. We'd gotten what we wanted. It's almost like the presence of these people were a violation. Aside from York himself, officers had confiscated 12 weapons from York's house. There were other incidents too. A local reporter was slapped with yet another lawsuit. Common law liens were filed against Sheriff Seals and a group of Superior Court judges. They doing it the right way. They're taking the necessary protocols. Just about everyone, including the sheriff, expects the Nuwaubian nation to die a slow death if its supreme leader remains behind bars. Wow. The Nuwaubian Savior Day Festival this June attracted a surprisingly large crowd, with 800 to 1,000 celebrants gathering among the pyramids and obelisk at 404 Shadydale Road. According to Jacob, many Nuwaubians have nowhere to go. There are still true believers, Jacob says, even among those whose children were allegedly violated. This is from Afton Villa, aftonvilla.com, a plantation in the heart of Georgia. Reynolds Plantation. Reynolds Plantation is a beautiful historic plantation located in Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. The plantation was founded in 1832 by John Reynolds, a wealthy planter. The plantation is best known for its role in the Civil War, when it was used as a hospital for Confederate soldiers. Today, the plantation is a popular tourist destination with a museum, a golf course, and a bed and breakfast. Let's shake it. Lake Oconee is known for its outstanding... Lake Oconee. Y'all need to do some research about Lake Oconee. Go see if that's where your people from. Go see if your people lived around that area. Do you know where your people lived? Oh. Your people lived in Mommy Africa. Lake Oconee is known for its outstanding sunsets, which are also part of the experience at Reynolds Plantation. Georgia Power constructed the hydroelectric dam in 1979 and used whole cloth to create this power source. The sale of Reynolds Plantation has been completed by MetLife. Reynolds Plantation is located in Greensboro, Georgia. The plantation is situated on Lake Oconee and is one of the largest and most popular lakes in the state. The name of Reynolds Plantation will be changed to Reynolds Lake Oconee. Yes. The name of Reynolds Plantation will be changed to Reynolds Lake Oconee. We can't have the word plantation. We can't have the word plantation. Plantation, planter, planting stuff. We can't have that. The word plantation, it conjures up memories of Kunta Kinte. It conjures up memories of shackles around the neck, the arms, the wrists, the ankles. We can't have that. We can't have nobody getting outside their body, getting all in their feelings. The Ritz-Carlton Hotel and Spa located on site is just a short distance away, and it is one of the 9 fine dining establishments, 6 award-winning golf courses, 4 marinas, a number of swimming pools, a world-class fitness center, miles of biking and walking trails. Reynolds Lake Oconee is a city located in Greene County, Georgia. MetLife, the owner of Reynolds Plantation, changed the property's name to Reynolds Lake Oconee in order to better reflect the company's brand and to be politically correct. And so that you can go. Slave labor was used on the family's plantation farm as well as in their home. Slave labor. Wait a minute. Slave labor. Don't those two words mean the same thing? Look it up. Let's shake it. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution. At Reynolds Plantation, a vision comes together, then falls apart. By J. Scott Truby, Bill Torpy, May 2011. Mercer Reynolds III, the visionary developer, had transformed family tracts on Lake Oconee, 80 miles east of Atlanta, into the nationally renowned Reynolds Plantation golf community. Politically connected, the silver-maned entrepreneur had served as an ambassador in Europe and campaign finance chairman for his friend George W. Bush, raising a record $270 million. Reynolds' main company, Linger Longer Development, was deeply in debt and a bank deadline loomed. The path to solvency, or one that would buy the company time, depended on Reynolds taking plantation owners on the path to solvency, or one that would buy the company time, depended on Reynolds talking plantation homeowners into purchasing money-losing golf courses and clubhouses. Reynolds was a casualty in the real estate collapse. Few have been more surprising, given the Reynolds family's large holdings, solid reputation, and deep political and business connections. They were the Cadillac of development. They underpromised and over-delivered, said State Rep Mickey Channel, Republican for Greensboro, a 25-year Reynolds Plantation homeowner. Now a guardian is managing the plantation and 3 other communities owned by Reynolds while the banks try to find a buyer or work out another deal with him. The Reynolds family's Greene County roots stretch for generations. By the 1930s, the family had assembled more than 10,000 acres of yellow pine timberland. When Georgia Power dammed the Oconee River in 1979, creating a 19,000-acre reservoir, the Reynolds found themselves with miles of lakefront property. The high-end Reynolds plantation, headed by Reynolds and his cousin Jamie Reynolds, was born. One of the South's premier residential enclaves. Fresh off the success of luring a Ritz-Carlton there in 2002, the developer pushed to add more amenities, and banks were eager to lend to such a respected firm. Reynolds Plantation had a simple business strategy: sell lots for elegant homes on and around the 90 miles of Lake Oconee shoreline, intersperse the rolling property with PGA-worthy golf courses, and then let the genteel atmosphere sell itself. Ah, do the right thing.